Hey, I'm Raz.
I'm Phil.
Welcome to Metal Anglers. We had a little incident on the track with a 28 car last week. Someone ran into the left front. So we're going to walk you through what you do after a situation like that, what to look for, what basic things can happen. It's going to be a little bit different on your car. This is a DNR chassis. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. Phil's going to be going through and showing us how we can look at stuff like that and how you can avoid having a problem next race.
Cool. Let's get to work. Okay, folks, so like we said, John took not a really hard hit, but a little bit of a hit in the front end, so we want to double check everything and make sure it's good. First thing I would do is come in and grab a hold and wiggle. I know this car, so I know roughly what we started with, and so far everything feels good. All I'm doing is I'm just feeling for anything out of the ordinary. You know your car, you'll know what's out of the ordinary. Next thing to do is go ahead and take the tire off. Okay, so now I got the tire off. I can see the front end a lot better now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look and see if anything is obviously bent, warped, moved, anything like that. I'm going to look at the upper control arm. I'm going to look at the upper heim joint that goes to the top of the spindle. I'm going to look at the steering rack. I'm going to make sure that everything where the steering tie rod goes into the steering rack, I'm going to make sure everything looks good there. Look at the heim joint, look at the tie rod itself, look at the heim joint here, make sure it's good to go. I'm going to look at the trailing arm back here. We have a trailing arm that goes back with a clevis. Everything looks good. I'm going to look down the lower control arm. I'm going to look at the heim joint that mounts at the frame. Everything looks good there. At this point here, I would go ahead and make sure that the rotor didn't get bent. So with looking at the rotor here, just pick a spot, a flat spot. I'm going to use the mount for the caliper, and I'm just going to gently rotate this, and I'm looking for any warp. I don't see any. The distance on the rotor to the mount is equal outside and inside, so that tells me that I'm pretty confident that the spindle snout didn't get bent. We're lucky with these cars; these spindles don't get bent very often. Very few get damaged. Okay, now with that, I'm going to go ahead and start taking apart the front end. I'm going to start with taking the nuts off for the spindle bolts, and then I'm going to take off the steering arm, the bottom nut here, and there. So 3/4 inch socket extension. May have to get in there and use a ratchet on it. We'll see in just a second. Yep, gonna have to get in there and use a ratchet because it's kind of tight. So we'll go ahead and do this. And you can see that it's in there pretty good and tight. Okay. Grab the impact. Hopefully Snap-on's got enough. And there we go. All right. Now I'll go ahead and I'm pretty confident that the nut here is pretty tight, so I'm not even going to attempt to do it with the impact. I'm just going to go ahead and do it with the wrench first. You can use a wrench, socket, ratchet, however you choose to do it. See if I can get it to go free. There we go. There we go. Now I'll hit it with the impact. Keeping in mind, whenever you take these apart, anytime you have a steel fastener to an aluminum piece, you want to have a washer in between. It'll protect your aluminum piece. make your life a lot easier in the future. Again, I'm pretty confident that this is really snug and tight on there, so I'm going to go ahead and just break it free with a hand ratchet first. Use the car to support itself. There we go. Grab my impact. Take my impact and boom, right apart there, just like so. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I got a little tool organizer, fastener organizer over here. I like it, it works really well. Keeps everything organized, and I can quick look over and see, oops, did I miss something? Maybe, maybe not. Happens every now and then, but it's a good way of making sure you put everything back on. Same thing, I'm gonna go ahead and break this free with a ratchet first, using the car to catch it and hold it. To pry against, I guess is a better way of putting it. And there we go. Go back to my impact. And as you see there, there's the washer in between the steel and the aluminum. Same thing on the back side. All right. Now, what I do here is I take and I use a bungee strap. Sometimes this can be a little bit of a headache, hassle. I use a bungee strap and I just strap the spindle back against the car to hold it in place, like so. And that just holds the spindle and the hub out of your way. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Okay, now we're into the steering arm to the ball joint. Basically what you want to do is you want to use a 3/4 inch socket on an impact, pop this off, and then you're going to use a puller, and I'll show you the puller in just a second. You want to use a puller to pop that off. I wouldn't use a hammer, because if the steering arm is able to be used again, you could damage it taking it off with a hammer. So what we'll do first is we'll go ahead and grab our impact, 3/4 inch socket, go ahead and hit it. Okay. And as I said before, we got the washer between the aluminum and the steel. Always, always, always want that. So now what I'll do is I'll take this is just a 2-jaw puller. It hooks in underneath, pushes down, pries it out. It's a really inexpensive, pretty safe way of doing it. You don't damage yourself, you don't damage a good tool, a good part. So you just put it on here, like so. Give yourself a little bit of room. Line it up. Bring down the center piece there to lock it in. There's no way I have enough strength to pull that out by hand. 7/8 socket on top. Grab your ratchet. Bring it down. Should be maybe a turn, maybe two. Should break it free. Pop it free. Boom. It's popped free. And as I don't know if the video caught it or not, but you saw I was putting a little pressure on it, and then it went free. You don't have to use an impact on this. Regular ratchet will work perfectly, and it'll take good care of it. And it takes the steering arm right out, like so. Really good tool. Recommend. You don't have to buy Snap-on or Matco, but definitely you want to have that. It'll help you out, make your life a lot easier. Okay, so this is the steering arm. First thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and look down the length of it, making sure that it's not twisted. It's aluminum, so these are designed to take an impact and not break so much so you can stay on the racetrack. So look down, this one looks straight. Look across the surface here, it looks good. Looking across the surface here, it looks good. Everything looks good. Look at the, go ahead and look at the taper. the taper right here, you want to make sure it's not oblonged, make sure there's no problems with it, anything like that. Inside here where the tie rod bolt or steering arm bolt, depending on which way you want to call it, this is threaded. You want to make sure it's not oblonged or anything like that. This steering arm looks good. We're going to go ahead and reuse it. We don't need to replace it. So, and that's a good thing. We want to take the dust cover off, just peel it off. Now we're looking at the ball joint. So the way you check the ball joint is you take your ball joint nut, put your ball joint nut back on top of the ball joint, and you bring it down, finger tight there. Then what you do is you take your impact with your 3/4 inch socket, and you're going to put it on top like this, and you're going to pull, and you're going to go ahead and spin it. And if this is bent, and it's bent really bad, you'll get a lot of wobble in it, and you'll be able to see it. If it's not bent, it'll move. It may move just a little bit, but that could be the socket wobbling on here. But if it's way bent, you'll see a lot of play. So we'll go ahead and do that right now. Verify that how our ball joint's doing. So if you look right here, the ball joint is not wobbling. It's not wobbling out, so this ball joint is good. So John got lucky. He so far we haven't found anything major in the normal things we would find broken or bent. You would bend a steering arm, or I'm sorry, a tie rod. You would bend a steering arm, ball joint, trailing arm. At this point here, we'd look at the shock and go ahead and verify everything's looking good at the shock. You want to look at the top of the shock, the bottom of the shock, the shaft, the body. But we're going to cover shocks in a future video, so stay tuned for that. We have a couple of broken shocks that we'll be repairing, and we'll do that in a future video. So now we'll go ahead and take the nut back off. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to put it back together. Like I said, John got really lucky. The hit wasn't that hard, but when we looked at the in-car, we were like, you know what, let's pull it apart. And let's just go even further than that. Anytime you take a hit in the front end, your front end is a very important part of your race car. It's huge to your handling. This should be standard. If you take a hit, check it, because it could mean the difference between first and fifth. So we're going to put the dust cover back on, pop that back down and on, grab the steering arm, which we have right here, put it back on. Now, important piece with the steering arm, this is tapered. I have seen these put on upside down, and you can see I'm pushing down in there. I have seen people put these on upside down. That can create a problem because it can come loose when you're out there racing, and especially if it's the right front, when you go into the turn, if it's loose, it's going to really create a handling characteristic that your driver probably won't be able to explain to you. So you just pop that down, making sure, again, taper down. So, and then washer, nut, and actually, I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite. That's blue Loctite. I don't want to use blue Loctite. I want to use red Loctite. Put just a touch of Loctite. I know I'm using a nylock, and there's people out there say because you're using a nylock, you don't have to use Loctite, but there's no law in the universe that says you don't have to use Loctite either. And tight is better than loose. So I'm going to go ahead. Now, this will spin, so I want to put a little bit of a tension on it, and there we go. And then I'm just going to go ahead and zing it down. Okay, that's good and tight right there. All right. Now what we do is make sure everything is good. Go ahead and take our bungee strap off and bring everything over. Now what I like to do is I like to use the 5/16, which is on the impact. I like to use the 5/16 socket on to help spin it on. A little bit of Loctite, a little dab will do you there, and Go ahead and get it lined up. Run it up through. Lefty loosey, righty tighty, right? Okay. Fighting me a little bit, so I'm gonna go ahead and use the ratchet to go ahead and get a couple threads started so I don't cross thread it. Get it lined back up. Come on. So this is the point where at the racetrack, a lot of guys will have, if they can do it, they'll have a complete front end put together, because sometimes just trying to change out, get this spindle back down on the steering arm, sometimes is a little difficult. So a lot of guys will have it where all you got to do is just take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fasteners maybe off, and you can put a whole nother front end on, and less stress, less time. So that's some people do that. We have a setup like that for when we're at the racetrack. If it gets too much damage, or we don't have a lot of time, like if we're out there in our heat and we, for whatever reason, because we got damaged, we didn't make it, and we have to jump right back into the C main or something like that. We'll just replace a whole front end at the racetrack, and it makes it a lot quicker. So as you can see, that made it, doing that like that made it a little bit easier. Now I'll go ahead and hit it with the impact. I've got Loctite on it, so I'll hit it with the impact, and then I'll double check it. I'll double check it. I'll double check it with the ratchet. I personally don't trust an impact in a situation like this to be tight. If I put it on by hand, I know it's tight. So okay, so like I said, you just want to make sure it's good and tight. And you see I got about 1/8 of a turn there. And I'll probably get, 1/8 of a turn, maybe a little less here. Yeah, a little less than 1/8 there. So that's good and snug now. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the nuts on the top of the spindle bolts. And as you can see, there's no washers there because the bottom of the spindle plate is steel. So we don't have to put a washer in there. Little drop there, run it down on by fingers. Little drop here. And put that one down. And you'll see in a minute, I'm going to go ahead and use the impact. I'm going to impact them down initially, and again, double check tight by hand. So 3/4 inch on an extension. And then what I got to do is, don't forget this. This is important. You want to hold the spindle nut with some type of a ratchet to ensure that it doesn't back off. So while you're tightening it, you want to just hold it. And then you want to hold the back side too. So you want to go ahead, when you do it, you just hold the back side also, get it lined up, get it in there. And okay, and you heard, I don't know if you could hear that or not, the tone of the impact changed, so I knew that the impact was done tightening. Now what I'll do is I'll use my ratchet, and I'll double check it by hand just to ensure that everything is snug, and there. Just ensure everything is snug. There. Okay. So that's good and snug. Now what I'll do is bring my tie rod over, spacer, put the spacer on, go ahead and line it all up. Maybe. There we go. Sorry about that. Had to give myself a little bit more room to work here. Finger tight first, steel into aluminum. Don't want to cross thread it. You see I got a couple threads there. My 3/8 socket for Allen head. Lift it up because it's recessed here for a high miss. So lift up to ensure that we're not pinching the high miss. Snug. Double check again. Good and tight. Grab my Loctite, little drip. Steel to aluminum, put my washer in place. Go ahead and get it threaded, get it started. Grab my impact, or grab my ratchet to hold it in place. Grab my impact with a 3/4 on it. And zing it down. Okay. Grab my ratchet, or my wrench with my ratchet, and go ahead and snug it. And that is basically it. Put some grease in the lower ball joint since we took it apart. This should be part of your prep too, but it never hurts to double grease. And I just got slobbered by the grease gun. So, excuse me for a second while I grab a rag. Nothing better than getting grease all over you while you're doing this. Okay. Bring your tire back in. Put it up on. Boom. Put your lug nuts on, like so. Grab your socket for your lug nuts, put them on here. There you go. When we go to prep the car and set the car up, we go through and torque all the lug nuts and everything like that, and we double check everything else. But this is basically how you go through and check for wreck damage. And John got lucky, we didn't have any. So see y'all next video. Thanks for stopping by. Click the subscribe button and keep watching for our next videos.